Welcome to another wonderful Brenda Maxfield audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Amish Romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Brenda Maxfield, Amish Romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. Mellie's Sweet Shop. Chapter 1. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Hebrews 11 verse 1, King James Version. Mellie straightened the packages of cinnamon rolls until they lined up perfectly with the dozens of cookies. She stood back and squinted at the display, pleased with the aesthetics. The bell over the door tinkled, and Caleb Glick entered. Mellie's face immediately went hot, and she tucked a loose blonde curl under her cap with shaking fingers. "Hello, Mellie," he said with a wide smile. "How's business?" His blue eyes twinkled, and their color reminded her of Edmund's pond on a hot summer day. He stepped to the counter and fingered a wrapped loaf of sweet bread. "It's good," she said, feeling a sudden need to fan herself. "What can I do for you?" She didn't know why she asked him, she already knew the answer. He would be looking for her sister Beth. It was his turn to flush. "I was looking for your sister. Truth be told, I was hoping she was here with you." Of course, he was hoping that Beth would be there. It wouldn't do for him to approach the main house and ask for her. That wasn't to be done, even though everyone in the family knew they were courting. "No, she's not here." Oh. What a stupid comment. It was obvious Beth wasn't there. The man had eyes, didn't he? I think she's doing some mending on the front porch." He bit the corner of his lip. "Will you tell her I stopped by?" Mellie nodded. "I was wondering about this Sunday night. The singing, you know." She knew. He wanted to take Beth in his courting buggy to the youth singing. Afterwards, they'd take the long way home, and Beth would come sneaking in at some late hour, no doubt giggling as she climbed into bed. Mellie let out a long sigh. Caleb picked up a covered tin of chocolate chip cookies. "I'll take these," he said. He handed Mellie the money. When she took it, his fingers grazed hers, and the resulting jolt that flashed through her hand nearly caused her to drop the cash. Her heart burned with both longing and shame as she tucked his money inside the cash box. "Did you bake these?" he asked, pausing for another moment at the counter. "Yes," she murmured. "Good. Then I know they'll be delicious." He smiled at her and turned to go. At the door, he hesitated and looked back. "Something else?" she asked. He blinked and shook his head, looking flustered. "No. Nothing else," he muttered. With that, he left the shop, the tinkling of the bell following him out. Mellie leaned heavily against the back wall and worked to calm her breathing. What was the matter with her? To act like such a fool in front of her sister's beau. Her mind raced back over everything she'd said. Had she appeared too eager? No. Surely not. Had she acted too shy? Did Caleb think her silly? Or even stupid? Oh, she hoped not. She sank onto the stool she kept in the back corner. Why should she care what Caleb thought about her anyway? What possible difference did it make to anything in her life? He was interested in her sister, not her. Mellie felt tears pricking the back of her eyelids. Why couldn't Caleb be interested in her? He liked her baking. Why couldn't he like her? Guilt rushed through her. Such thoughts could only lead to heartache. And shame. God would not be pleased with her, not at all. The door chimed, and she looked up to see Beth waltz through. Mellie jolted up, wondering if her errant thoughts had summoned her sister to the shop. "Mellie, wait till you hear this," Beth announced, marching straight to the counter. "Dan has come by. Again. He says he's ready to move his family into the big house as soon as possible." Mellie frowned. "What? But there's no room for them. Where are we supposed to stay? You and me and Faith and Gabe and Eli? Is he going to throw us all out on the street?" Beth grimaced. "He is our brother. I doubt he expects us to camp on the street. But still. What does Ma'am say?" Beth shook her head and exhaled loudly. "I don't think she knows about it. And I'm not going to be the one to tell her. She has enough trouble. Did she get up today? At all?" "No. I took breakfast up to her. She's bad today, Mellie. Can hardly shift a finger without pain. I adjusted her pillows, and she moaned even at that smallest movement." Tears filled Beth's eyes. Then she tried to make light of it, saying it wasn't so bad. "But it is. What about the herbs old maid gave her yesterday? Aren't they helping at all?" "Don't seem to be. She needs to go to an English doctor." Beth's head snapped up. "She won't. Don't you even mention it to her. She's upset enough. But an English doctor might help. I heard of someone else who has rheumatoid arthritis. My friend Betty's uncle, I think it was. He went to an English doctor and got some medicine that really helped." "Maybe so. But Ma'am won't hear of it, and you know it." Mellie pursed her lips. Ma'am's stubbornness was a well-known fact to the whole family, and in this case, Mellie thought it was misplaced. Her ma'am hadn't been able to function with any sense of normalcy for almost 2 years. 2 years of constant pain was enough to make a person lose their mind. "How are sales today?" Beth asked. So. Mellie looked at her sister's gentle face with its soft features. She wished her face looked more like Beth's. Her own profile was pointed and thin. When she gazed at herself in the hand mirror, she thought her features were too strong-looking. Her blonde hair softened the look some, but since it was pulled tightly back in a bun to accommodate her cap, it didn't do much good. Her eyes widened. Now was she spending her thoughts on her own personal appearance? She was having quite a morning. "Caleb came by," she said, wanting to get the message out and over with. "Oh." Beth cocked one of her brows. "He said something about this Sunday night." "Oh." Beth repeated. "I suppose he wants to escort me to the youth singing." "That would be my guess." Mellie bit her lip and then asked, "Do you want to go with him?" Beth smiled. "He's really quite funny. Did you know that? At first, I thought he was a bit shy, but once you get to know him, he's funny." Mellie would have guessed that. More than once, he'd brought a giggle to her lips. "But do you want to go with him?" Beth gave her an intense look. "Why? Have I been obvious?" "What do you mean?" She coughed and shuffled her feet. "Nothing." "Beth, tell me." "What do you mean?" "It's just, well, nothing." "Never mind." She walked back to the door of the shop. "Dan is coming for supper tonight." "With his whole family?" "No. Just him, I guess. He wants to talk about moving in." Mellie shook her head. "I still don't see where he's going to put all of us. We can't all squeeze into the Dottie house with Grandpa." "You're right. Let's just see what he has to say, all right?" "All right," Mellie reluctantly agreed. Beth gave her a wave and left the shop. Mellie watched her go, first through the front and then through the side window. Beth was carrying a book, like usual. Mellie hadn't noticed it when she had first walked in, but it was no surprise. Beth sneaked in reading time whenever she could. It used to irritate their dad no end when he was alive. Get outside. Weed the garden. You're wasting precious time with your nose in that book, he'd say. Beth would obediently stash her book and go outside. But the minute he wasn't looking, there she'd be, back at it, glued to her story. Mellie gave a bittersweet smile. She missed their dad. Oh, he could be mighty bossy at times, but he used to push her in the tire swing so high, she touched heaven itself. 3 years he'd been gone. It was hard to believe. Mellie opened the cash box back up and counted her profits for the day. $66.75. Not bad. She looked over her stock and wished a few more customers would show up before she closed at 6 o'clock that evening. If they didn't come and buy up some of the remaining goods, she'd be forced to give them away or take them back to the house. They wouldn't be sufficiently fresh come morning. Well, her brothers would be glad of it. They happily gobbled up any of her baked goods considered too old to sell. She wandered across the tiny shop back to the front window. She wished Caleb would drive by again. She wouldn't mind admiring his strong profile and the easy way he managed his horse. And just what had Beth meant with her comment about being obvious? It wasn't their way to broadcast their romantic interests. Fact was, Amish youth sneaked around most of the time, keeping their affections secret. It only became obvious during Sunday night youth singings or if someone spotted a couple in a courting buggy. Most folks knew of Caleb's interest in Beth. They'd been seen together on various occasions. So Beth's comment really didn't make sense. Had something happened? Had Caleb proposed to her? Mellie's knees went weak, and she felt a sudden need to sit down. Wouldn't Beth have told her if she was engaged? They often shared their deepest feelings with each other. With only 18 months between them, they'd grown up close. Much closer than either of them felt to Faith, who was 3 years younger than Mellie. Mellie gripped the windowsill with both hands. Is Caleb engaged? She mentally went over each word he'd spoken to her earlier. He'd given no indication of something so serious with Beth. Mellie fought the tears that threatened to spill. Why did she continually do this to herself? Why did she continually think of her sister's beau? It was tortuous and did absolutely no good at all. It only served to make her upset. Mellie sniffed loudly and raised her chin. Enough? She was finished with it. Caleb would someday be her brother-in-law, not her beau, and it was time she faced it. Faced it square on. Truth was, Obadiah Westman had taken a fancy to her. She'd never paid him any heed, but perhaps she should. Yes. Perhaps she should. Faith scurried from the stovetop to the sink and back again. Sweat beaded on her upper lip, and her cheeks were flushed. He'll be here any minute, she warned. Mellie finished putting the pickles into the serving bowl. Oh, Faith. It's only Dan. He's our brother, not the bishop. Still, I want everything to go well. Faith sighed and tossed a hot pad onto the counter. You know why he's coming, don't you? He wants to move in, Mellie said. Where he plans for us to go is a mystery. Faith's eyes welled with tears. He's the eldest. He'll get his way. Mellie shrugged. In truth, she was just as upset as her sister, but she didn't need to show it. Is Ma'am coming down to eat with us? I hope so. Maybe she can talk some sense into Dan. Beth wandered into the kitchen. What can I do? Dish up the potatoes, would you? Faith asked. Why does this look like dinner instead of supper? Beth asked. What's the special occasion? Faith is hoping to coax Dan not to throw us out on the street, Mellie replied. I am not. And we're not being thrown to the street. Faith grabbed up her hot pad again and took the pot of green beans from the stove. Anybody here? Mellie recognized Dan's rich bass tone coming from the front room. In here, she called back. Supper's almost ready. Supper, Beth repeated with a sniff. Beth, be nice. Please, Faith pleaded. All three brothers were already seated on the long dining table bench. Gabe and Eli were chatting about their new milk cow, and Dan was listening intently. The girls served the food, and Mellie noticed Mam's chair was empty. I'm going upstairs to see if Mam's feeling up to coming down, she said. Without waiting for a reply, she hurried to the stairs and took the steps 2 at a time up to her mother's room. She knocked gently on the half-open door and stepped inside. Mam was sitting on the edge of her bed, an ashen look on her face. Mam! Mellie cried, rushing to her. Are you getting up on your own? Do you need to use the bathroom? Can I help you? Mam held up her thin hand. The knuckles of her fingers were swollen and misshapen, so much so that she looked much older than her 49 years. No, she took a long rasping breath. I want to come down for supper. You sure, ma'am? Worry laced through Mellie's heart. Her mother looked awful, as if she could hardly breathe, let alone move. I'm sure. Mam held out her arm and Mellie gently cupped her elbow. She eased her up from the bed and together, they shuffled to the door. Dan's here, Mellie said, injecting a bright note in her voice. Mam gave her a sharp look. I know. Mellie hesitated. You know why he's here, then? He wants to move his family in. What do you think? Mam shook her head. We need help. Farm's too big for Gabe and Eli. And Eli's soon to be married. We've been doing all right. Mam began to shuffle forward again, and Mellie helped her. My sweet shop is doing fine. Mam gave her a feeble smile. Good. That's good, Mellie girl. It took them many long minutes to make it down the stairs. Months earlier, Mellie had offered to have Mam carried up and down the stairs, but Mam had vehemently opposed it. She said she was perfectly capable of going up and down the steps on her own. She wouldn't even consider being carried. Now, as they descended one painful step at a time, Mellie realized how much her mother's condition had deteriorated. Again, she wished with all her heart that her mother would agree to see an English doctor. Perhaps she'd bring it up again later. Mellie sighed. It wouldn't do any good. Despite her physical condition, Mam's spirit was as stubborn as ever. She'd never agree to it. Mellie feared the food would be cold by the time they got to the table, but when they arrived, no one said a word. They all welcomed Mam, making a fuss over how happy they were to see her sitting there with them, and how much better she looked. Mam gave them her best smile, which by any standards, was a sad sight. After Dan led them in the silent blessing, they began eating. Why isn't Grandpa here? Dan asked, between mouthfuls of potatoes. I don't know. Faith looked at Beth. You asked him to come, didn't you? Beth's face turned bright red. I thought you did. He usually joins us for supper anyway, Mellie remarked. So, where is he? Gabe climbed from the bench. I'll get him. He hustled off through the washroom to the side door. Mellie heard the screen slam behind him. Within a few minutes, Gabe returned with their grandfather. So, you're having a family meal without me, huh? Grandpa asked with a twinkle in his eye. Grandpa, Faith said. Beth was supposed to ask you to come over. Sorry, Grandpa. I thought you'd come anyway, Beth said. Why, Esther, Grandpa said, gazing at Mam. You're up and about. How nice. Hello, Dad, Mam said. Eat up. They all laughed and dug in with renewed vigor. Mellie found it difficult to eat with her usual gusto. All she could think about was the upcoming conversation. Dan laughed and joked around as usual, but she could see a nervous twitch now and again next to his mouth. He was dreading the conversation as much as she was. So why was he doing it, then? Or maybe it wasn't dread she saw. Maybe it was excitement. Chapter 2. After Mellie had served some of her day-old cinnamon rolls for dessert, a quiet fell over the table. Dan cleared his throat. "You all know why I'm here," he said. No one responded. "Dad's been gone 3 years now," he continued. Mellie swallowed the lump in her throat. "Ruthie and I have been farming her family's land, but now her younger brother is taking over. They don't need me anymore, and you do." Eli looked down at his empty plate, then over at his brother. "Is this because I'm getting married come November? Is that why?" Dan tilted his head. "Partially. Without you, Eli, the running of the farm is going to fall squarely on Gabe." Grandpa raised his hand. "Hold on. Don't I count for anything around here?" Dan's face flushed. "Of course, Grandpa. But you and Gabe need me. That doesn't mean you have to live here." Faith blurted and then clapped her hand over her mouth. Dan looked affronted. "Ruthie's brother will be taking over their Dottie house. Besides, my family is getting too big to stay there now. I'm the eldest Fisher child. I need to be on the land I'm farming." He looked to their mother. "Ma'am, what do you think?" Everyone's eyes turned to her. She swallowed, making a small gulping noise. "You belong here," she said, her voice cracking. "In your own home." Mellie let out her breath. So that was it, then? It was done. "Where are we going to stay?" asked Faith. "There's not room for all of us." "I've thought of this." Dan looked around the table. "Eli will be leaving in November, which frees up a bed there. My 2 boys can bunk in there." "With me?" Gabe asked. "Yes. And the 2 girls can take Faith's room." Mellie could feel Faith go stiff beside her. "And Faith can move in with Mellie and Beth." "And you and Ruthie?" Beth asked. "Where will you sleep?" Dan grew silent. He turned to Ma'am. "We thought that maybe we could move you to the Dottie house. It's 1 level. There'd be no stairs to climb." Mellie caught her breath. Her brother was actually going to oust their mother from her own bedroom? The very room she and Dad had shared for years? How could he even think to do such a thing? She could see her own thoughts on the subject reflected in all her siblings' expressions. She turned toward her mother, expecting to see hurt feelings. But instead, her mother was nodding. "Makes the best sense," she said. She cast her watery gaze upon Grandpa. "What do you think, Dad? Willing to share the same roof again?" "But Grandpa can't take care of Ma'am," Faith cried. "She needs looking after." Ma'am's face turned bright pink. "I can see to myself," she snapped. Faith gulped. "Sorry, Ma'am. It's just that we often bring you food, and..." Ma'am's eyes narrowed. "So, you take a few more steps." Faith clamped her lips shut and nodded, duly thwarted. "What about my sweet shop?" Mellie asked. "I use the kitchen for hours with all the baking I have to do. Ruthie knows that. So, I can continue?" "We don't see why not." Mellie gave a half smile, hoping she looked grateful. In truth, she was grateful, but her mind raced ahead to the challenge of living with Ruthie. The woman loved her brother, she had no doubt of that. But Ruthie was, well, difficult. Her personality was sharp and unforgiving, and Mellie didn't see how it was going to make for a pleasant life. She glanced at Beth, envying her. Chances were good that Beth would be leaving the family soon herself, something that was gaining appeal with every passing moment. "Settled then," Ma'am said, looking pleased. "Eli, do you mind if we move in right away? Before you get married? You won't mind a bit of overcrowding in your bedroom for a few months, will you?" Eli shook his head. "No. Of course not. My nephews are welcome any time." Dan let out a sigh. "Thank you." He glanced around the table again. "Thank you, everyone." Faith bolted up, knocking against the bench. "I'll get started with the clean-up." Mellie rose, too. "I'll help." Beth stood. "So will I." The three girls were silent as they bustled about the kitchen, washing dishes, storing leftovers, and wiping down the counters. Finally, Mellie sighed and faced her two sisters. "We can pretend all we want, but this is happening." Faith slumped into a chair. "Ruthie," she gave a pleading look to Mellie. "What are we going to do?" "We're going to welcome her with open arms," Beth said. "She's our brother's wife and part of our family." Mellie looked at her older sister. She'd never been so accommodating when it had come to Ruthie before. "Beth," she questioned. "What is it?" Beth gave her a quick look and then went back to scrubbing the last corner of the sink. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do. Why are you being so understanding all of a sudden?" Faith stood and gave Beth a curious look herself. Beth licked her lips and frowned. "She's kin. And I don't think God would look kindly on us speaking poorly of her." Mellie frowned. Of course, Beth was right. But still. "You don't have to go all holy on us, sister," Faith said. "We know you don't like her a lick better than we do." Mellie's eyes went wide, and she hurried to the kitchen door to peer out toward the front room. If Dan had overheard, he would have been crushed. "Faith Fisher!" Beth scolded. "Ma'am would have your hide for that kind of comment." Faith sank back down to her chair. "You're right. I'm sorry." "It's going to be a big change," Mellie said, hoping to restore the peace. "We're all going to have to adjust. I don't like Ma'am being out in the dotty house. I know it's right out back, but we won't be able to check on her as easily," Faith said. "You're right." Mellie took off her apron. "We'll just have to be more vigilant. That's all." She gazed at Faith and Beth. "I'm going to bring up the subject of going to an English doctor again." Faith took in a quick intake of breath. Beth shook her head. "It won't do a bit of good," Beth said. "She won't go." "Probably not. But I have to ask again. I can't stand to see her suffer so. None of us can. But she's stubborn as a goat guarding the clothesline. She won't budge." Mellie gazed out the kitchen window and imagined what could happen if Ma'am agreed to go. Probably, her pain could be lessened. Who knew? Perhaps, she'd even be able to get up and about better. She didn't understand why Ma'am had to be so stubborn. There were many Amish who went to English doctors. Not as a first resort, certainly, but when things got drastic, many went. And Ma'am's case was drastic. "Dan's leaving," Beth said from the doorway. Mellie and Faith walked out with her to the front room to say goodbye. "I'm off then," Dan said. "I'll tell Ruthie that everything is settled." "Give the children our love," Beth told him. "That I will." He put on his felt hat, smiled his goodbye, and left the house. Gabe and Eli looked at each other with a shrug and both went outside through the washroom. Grandpa walked over to Ma'am, who was sitting in a rocking chair next to the warming stove. "Well, daughter, I'll look forward to you moving in. No reason to wait. Have the girls bring your things tomorrow. Ma'am nodded her head. Grandpa leaned down and gave her an uncustomary kiss on her cap. Mellie's lips parted in surprise. Showing such affection wasn't normal in their family. In fact, now that she thought on it, she had no remembrance of Grandpa ever kissing anyone in public. He stood back up and saw all three sisters looking at him. "So, you heard me," he said, his voice thin. "Bring Esther's things around tomorrow." "Yes, Grandpa." "We will," Faith said. He shuffled out of the room, and Mellie went to Ma'am and stretched out her hand. "Are you ready to go back up? Or would you like to stay down here a while?" Ma'am let out her breath in a long sigh. Mellie could see the fatigue on her face and the familiar tightness around her eyes. "I'm ready to go up," she said. Mellie gently put her arms around her and lifted her from the chair. She let Ma'am brace herself against her side, and they inched their way to the stairs. It took a full 10 minutes to get up to Ma'am's room. "No more stairs after tomorrow," Mellie said, trying for a playful note in her voice. She tucked Ma'am into her bed. "Do you need anything else? I know you girls don't want Ruthie here." Ma'am's voice was weak, but sharp. Mellie froze. "Don't pretend," Ma'am said. Mellie straightened and gazed down at her mother. "It's going to be fine," she said. "And it will be nice to have the children here. Ruthie's a hard woman." Mellie swallowed, shocked at her mother's words. She had no idea how to respond to such a comment. "But she loves Dan and their children," Ma'am said and closed her eyes. "Of course, she does." Mellie tucked the quilt more firmly under Ma'am's chin. "Of course, she does, Ma'am. You rest now." Deciding that it wasn't the right timing to bring up an English doctor again, Mellie slipped out of the room, leaving the door ajar. From the hallway, she heard noise from the bedroom she shared with Beth and walked in to see her sister standing at the window. She walked over to join her. Neither spoke for a long moment. "You okay?" Mellie finally asked. Beth hadn't seemed herself since she'd visited her out in the sweet shop. "Of course." Mellie turned to study her sister's face. There was a pinched look around her mouth and eyes. "Beth, ever wonder what it would be like to teach the children?" Mellie gave a start. What in the world was Beth talking about? Teach the children? You mean at the schoolhouse? Yes. A faraway look now came to Beth's face. At the schoolhouse? No. Truth be told, I was happy when I finished 8th grade. Don't see any reason to prolong the experience. But the learning? All the learning to be had. Beth turned to Mellie, her eyes alight. Every time I read a book, I realize how much I don't know. She was getting into dangerous territory, and Mellie tensed. But we do know all that's needed. We know how to can and sow and mend and plant. Beth shook her head, cutting Mellie off. Yes, yes. All of that. But the world, here, she flung out her arms, accidentally knocking her knuckles into the window glass. There's so much out there. Teachers have an excuse to learn. Mellie was stunned as she watched Beth come alive in a way she'd never seen before. Her face grew animated, and her eyes sparkled. But then, just as quickly, it all faded. Our district has a good teacher, Beth murmured. And they did. John Beeler had been teaching for a few years. It was somewhat unusual to have a male teacher in an Amish school, but John was wonderful. The Hollybrook district loved him and begged him to stay at the end of each school year. Mellie continued staring at Beth. Do you want to be a teacher? She asked. Is that what you're really saying? Beth shook her head as if the idea was foolish. No, of course not, Where would I teach? And besides, if I were to be married, I wouldn't be a teacher for long. At the thought of her sister marrying, Mellie's mind flew once again to Caleb. Were they engaged already? Asking such personal questions wasn't really done, but they were sisters. Close sisters. Has he spoken? Mellie asked, more than a little afraid of the answer. Caleb? Yes. Caleb. Beth inhaled and then blew out her breath in a long hiss of air. He will, she said. You're sure? Something inside Mellie was dying. She tried to keep the pleading from her voice, but she wasn't sure if she succeeded. Beth didn't seem to notice anything amiss. I'm sure. Mellie nodded and turned away, toward her bed. That's wonderful good, isn't it? Wonderful good, Beth repeated, with a decided lack of enthusiasm. Mellie unpinned her cap and took it from her head. She also took out the pins from her tightly twisted bun. Her blonde hair fell down her back in one long thick curl. She picked up her brush from the dresser and sat on the edge of her bed. With methodical strokes, she brushed her hair, reaching with her entire arm to get to the ends. She braided it loosely and tied a string around it so it wouldn't be such a mess when she awoke. Then she got out her night clothes. Beth remained at the window as the darkness crept over the land. Do you want to light the lantern? Mellie asked. No. Let's not. The darkness feels cooler. Indeed, their room was stuffy after the hot Indiana day. The open window helped, but there didn't seem to be any breeze coming in. The fireflies are out, Beth observed. Come watch them with me. So Mellie did. They stood together as the tiny lights zigzagged across the yard, flicking on and off in a random display of summer lights. For a long time, they stood there. Neither spoke. But Mellie's mind was not quiet, nor did she think was Beth's. Caleb's face loomed in Mellie's thoughts. His handsome good looks. His clear blue eyes. His brown hair with that funny cowlick in front, the one she was so sure would be soft to the touch. In her mind's eye, Caleb was smiling at her. Happy to see her, to talk to her. Happy to be with her. Mellie sucked in air and felt the tears burn the back of her eyelids. She turned away from the window and from Beth. It was time for bed. Ruthie stood on the front porch, directing all the men. That goes in the kitchen, she hollered to Gabe, who was struggling with an oversized box. That one to our bedroom, she told her husband. Mellie had gathered up a stack of quilts from the back of the van and was balancing them carefully while trying to peer over the top so she didn't miss the step. Is there a trunk? Ruthie asked her. Someplace to store the quilts for now? Ma'am has a trunk, but it's full of her things. Empty it out, would you? Ruthie asked. I'm sure your mother won't mind. You can take all the stuff from inside out to the Dottie house. Mellie bristled. How did Ruthie know if her mother would mind or not? Mellie was quite sure she would mind. It was her trunk, after all. Why don't I stack them in the bedroom? Mellie asked. I could put them on top of the dresser for now. No. That's a horrible idea. They'll look ridiculous on the dresser. Put them in the trunk. Ruthie fixed her attention on the driver of the van. We have more back at my folks' place, she said, striding down the steps to him. You'll have to make more trips. Mellie gritted her teeth and made her way inside to the staircase. It has started. Ruthie was there, and by the looks of it, it was going to be worse than Mellie predicted. Faith met her halfway down the stairs. Here, give some of them to me. You're going to trip, Faith offered, holding out her arms. They divided the quilts between them and went up to Ma'am's old room. The trunk was in the far corner. Ruthie wants the quilt stored in the trunk. But the trunk's full. We left Mam's things in it. I was going to have Dan and the boys take it to the Dottie house. Not anymore. Ruthie insists that we take the things out and haul them to the Dottie house and leave the trunk here. But it's Mam's trunk. Not anymore. Faith sank onto the floor with her armload of quilts. Mellie, I'm worried. Mellie gazed down on her younger sister with sympathy. So am I. But moaning about it won't help. Her tone was gentle, but she couldn't afford to let Faith pull her into a worse place than she already was. Faith struggled to get back to her feet without letting the quilts drop. You're right. I'm sorry. No need to be sorry. Truth be told, I feel the same way, but we have to move ahead. We all have to live together now. Do you think I should move out to the Dottie house, too? Faith asked. I could better care for Mam out there. And sleep where? On the floor in Mam's room. Faith pursed her lips. I could put a mattress on the floor. Is that what you really want to do? No, Faith sighed. What I really want is for Dad to be alive and for our family to return to normal. This is normal, now, Mellie said, cringing at her own words. We have to get used to it. Chapter 3. Mellie was behind in her baking. What with Dan and Ruth moving in, she'd been occupied from sunup to sundown. Supper had been served and now the whole family was in the front room for Bible reading and prayer. Mellie hesitated at the kitchen door. She loved hearing the scriptures read in Old German, but right then, she longed for a moment of quiet. A moment of peace. Baking would give that to her. She wondered what would happen if she didn't go out there with them. Would they even notice? The room was full to exploding, what with Dan's children spread around the room. If she skipped Bible reading, she could get a batch of cookies made for the morning. She hadn't even opened the sweet shop that day. She wondered just how many customers she'd missed. She also wondered if Caleb had stopped by. Her heartbeat increased, and she closed her eyes and inhaled. But why would he have stopped by? He'd already delivered his message the other day. Beth would go with him in his courting buggy that Sunday evening. Mellie angled her body so she could spot Beth amidst the family crowd. She had a smile on her face, but Mellie knew her well. Beth wasn't so much smiling as escaping. When she entered her own world of thoughts and imaginings, her sister would paste that smile on her face so everyone around would think she was enjoying the chatting and activity. But in actuality, she was miles away. Mellie's eyes narrowed slightly. Was Beth dreaming about Caleb? Or was she dreaming about whatever latest book she was reading? In their childhood, Mam used to take them to the Hollybrook Public Library. She'd allow each of them to check out 3 books, pre-approved by her, of course. Mellie had long since lost interest in visiting the library. But not Beth. She still went with regularity. And of course, Mam was no longer in any position to pre-approve her books. Mellie wondered if Mam even knew that Beth still checked out books from the library. More than once, Mellie had found a library book tucked under their mattress. And when she sat and flipped through the book, she knew why. It would have never gotten Mam's pre-approval stamp. Not that the books were nasty, exactly. But they were books that talked about different cultures and different belief systems. Beth was flirting with danger, all right. Mellie never confronted Beth about it. For one thing, Beth was her older sister. And secondly, ever since Beth started to show an interest in Caleb, Mellie felt a sort of wall between them. She tried to hurdle it and was sometimes successful. But other times, Mellie knew full well that the wall was mostly on her side. Beth was oblivious, which was just as well. Mellie hugged herself and sighed. Oh, Caleb, why couldn't you have fallen for me instead of Beth? Mellie. Faith called, coming out from the front room. "Everyone's waiting for you." "I'm coming," Mellie said, leaving the kitchen. Evidently, her absence had been noted after all. Mellie was up before their rooster began crowing, which was saying something. That crazy rooster's internal clock was forever topsy-turvy. Often, the animal would begin its ruckus well before sunrise, ruining many a night's sleep. That morning, Mellie reveled in the quiet of the house at such an early hour. She rhythmically moved about the kitchen, measuring and pouring and stirring. She hoped to get a large portion of the baking finished before anyone else was up and about. She had an hour and a half of productive work before Ruthie walked into the room. "Mellie? What the world are you doing up so early?" Ruthie's voice was scratchy and full of sleep. "Morning, Ruthie. I had some baking to finish before opening the sweet shop." Ruthie shuffled over to the tin coffee pot and opened the lid. "I heard you down here. I hope this won't become a habit. None of us should be up for another half hour or so." Mellie stiffened but kept her smile firmly in place. "I have to get up fairly early many mornings. Not as early as today, mind you. But early. I try to get a lot of baking out of the way before breakfast." Ruthie sniffed. "We'll have to work this out. I like to be the first one in the kitchen. I have my routine, you know. I have to, what with 4 children nipping at my heels all day." She chuckled. "Dan told me that my baking would be fine." Mellie tried to maintain an even tone. "Did he, now?" Ruthie smiled. "What do men know about how a kitchen works, huh?" "No, Mellie, we'll need to discuss this further. But right now, I need a cup of coffee." Mellie watched her sister-in-law fill the pot with water. She knew she should keep quiet and let it go, but she felt that her very purpose in life being challenged. The sweet shop was like her baby. And it brought in decent money, too. "I need to bake in the early mornings," she said firmly. "I don't see how I can change that. My baked goods must be fresh." Ruthie turned off the tap and set the pot on the counter. She looked at Mellie. For a long moment, they simply stared at one another. Then Ruthie gave her a wide smile. "You go right ahead today, Mellie. Since you're already elbow-deep in flour. As I said, we'll discuss this more thoroughly later." She picked the coffee pot back up and scooped it full of fresh grounds. She moved to the cooking stove and turned on a burner, setting the pot on top. "This should be ready in about 10 minutes. I'll be back in to check on it." With that, she gave Mellie another smile and left the room. Both anger and dread slugged through Mellie's stomach. She set down her mixing spoon and took 2 slow, deliberate breaths, blowing out the air from between tight lips. Okay. So this was the way it was to be. She walked to the oven and cracked the door a half-inch to gaze at her muffins. They were rising nicely, and their sweet, spicy aroma filled the room. Mellie wasn't about to be the cause of unrest in the house. She'd simply get up earlier yet, and tiptoe around the kitchen so that Ruthie would have no idea she was up. Yes. That should work nicely. Mellie was unusually grateful for her work in the sweet shop that day. As everyone struggled with their new normal back at the big house, she was snug in her little shop minding her own affairs. There had been no customers yet, but it was still fairly early in the day. She picked up her broom and swept the floor. She wasn't worried about any dust getting on the food as it was all wrapped securely in plastic wrap. She opened the door to the friendly tinkling bell and stood out on the small porch. While she was there, she gave it a good sweeping, too. Her dad and grandpa had built this shop for her 4 years earlier. She was mighty young then, barely 16. But all she wanted to do was bake. Finally, her dad declared that if she was going to bake her days away, the family might as well see some profit from it. Mellie had been over the moon excited. She'd helped set up the tables and painted the inside walls a lovely peach color. The outside, she'd painted yellow. Their neighbor, Tuk-Zook, had made a beautiful sign for her, Mellie's Sweet Shop. For days, Mellie had practiced her math, pretending to give customers change. And then Ma'am had completely surprised her with a battery-operated calculator, which made figuring large amounts simple. At first, Beth had helped her with the shop, but as time went on, Mellie worked mainly alone. She loved it. She began to decorate the shop with embroidery pieces her grandmother had stitched years before. Mellie had even gone so far as to hang a small quilt on the back wall. She'd received more than one offer from customers to purchase the quilt. But the quilt had been used when every new baby had come into the family. There were simply too many memories tied to it to even consider selling it. Mellie realized that selling quilts might be a right fine idea someday. But her hands were full with her baking. Perhaps someday she'd expand her little shop to include more than pies, breads, and rolls, cookies, and cakes. Her shop was located right off the main road. Sometimes passers-by stopped in, never having heard of her before. But mostly, she had her regular customers. Englishers from Hollybrook purchased regularly and made up most of her customers. Every now and again, an Amish friend would buy something. But frankly, most of them made their own baked goods and didn't need to purchase hers. Except for her cinnamon rolls. No one could resist them. Mellie smiled and went back inside the shop. She leaned the broom against the wall in the corner. The bell rang, and she turned toward the door, a smile of greeting on her face. Caleb. Her heart leapt to her throat, and she almost stumbled backward to her counter. She clasped her hands together so he wouldn't see them shaking. Caleb, she said. I didn't hear you. Walking today. I'm headed to the Zook's. Dad needs to borrow one of his saws, and I said I'd fetch it. Mellie swallowed and nodded. Just thought I'd stop in since I was passing by. Mellie licked her lips and looked at him. He didn't appear to have any other reason to be there, and her mind buzzed trying to think of something to say. Why did she always get so nervous when he was around? It was aggravating to say the least. Going to be a nice day, she finally blurted and then winced. How boring can I be? We're hoping for a bit of rain. The crops are getting dry, Caleb responded. He took off his straw hat and came closer, glancing at her baked offerings. I see you have fresh cinnamon rolls today. Mellie grinned, on safe territory now. Yes, I do. Could I be tempting you with some? Caleb laughed, and his eyes gleamed. Mellie caught her breath. Why did the man have to be so handsome? Mellie Fisher, you can always tempt me with those cinnamon rolls. I ain't never tasted anything so fine. He gazed at a package and pulled out his money. Mellie raised her hand. You can have them today, Caleb. As a prize for being such a good customer. Mellie was shocked at her own words. She wasn't in the habit of giving her sweets away. What must Caleb be thinking? I appreciate that, he said. I truly do. But now, that wouldn't be right, would it? You can have them. She picked up a package and held them out at the same moment he raised his hand toward her. In a quick second, their arms knocked against each other and the rolls tumbled to the ground. Oh, she cried, bending down. Caleb squatted down to pick them up, too. For a frozen moment, their eyes locked, their faces so close together she could almost feel his breath on her cheeks. He didn't flinch. He didn't move. Something in the back of his eyes caught and held her as if in a trance. There was something there. Something in his gaze. Here you go, he stuttered, grabbing the rolls from the floor. I'm sorry. Are they smashed? Mellie swallowed hard and jolted back to a standing position. What had she seen in his eyes? She surely must have been mistaken, for she thought she'd seen affection there. But no, she was wrong, for he had stood up, too, and the look on his face was anything but affectionate. Instead, all she saw was confusion and a cold wariness. He coughed and pulled out his money. Now, I need to pay, for sure and for certain. They're not sellable now. She took a slight step back. Yes. They're not sellable, which is why you must take them. You have no choice. She gave him a wavering smile, fighting a sudden urge to burst into tears. He looked down at the floor and took a big breath before bringing his eyes to hers once again. All right. And thank you, Mellie. His voice was soft, and for a split second, he dropped his guard again. Then he backed up toward the door, all business. Have a good day. He turned on his heel and left the store. She ran after him, catching the door before it closed completely. I told Beth, she called after him. He stopped and turned. What? About you asking after her last time. I told her. He bit his lower lip and slowly nodded. Thank you. She'll be ready, Mellie said. While Beth hadn't told her specifically that she'd go in Caleb's courting buggy that Sunday evening, Mellie knew she would. Who wouldn't? Given Caleb's handsome good looks and his pleasant personality. Again, Caleb thanked her. For another moment, they stared at each other. Then Mellie smiled weakly and withdrew back into her shop. Why had she felt compelled to bring up Beth? Because I feel guilty, she answered herself. Because I'm much too fond of her beau. It isn't right. It's scandalous, that's what it is. And certainly not pleasing to God. She looked around her shop and decided it was a good time to wash down all the shelves and tables. A burst of vigorous labor would stop her wayward thoughts in their tracks and put her mind on something else. At least, that was what she hoped. He came again? Beth questioned her. Why? Just stopping by, Mellie answered. That's what he said anyway. And so you know, I gave him some of my cinnamon rolls. He didn't pay you? Beth looked shocked. He offered, but I wouldn't let him. Mellie took a deep breath and plunged ahead. He's practically family, isn't he? Beth gave her a sharp look. If you're trying to wheedle your way into my secrets, you can save your breath. She folded the dish towel over the rung at the edge of the kitchen counter. Mellie grimaced. You can't blame me for trying. You've been awfully close-mouthed lately. Beth shrugged. No. That's not true. I'm just not broadcasting everything. Besides, you know it's not our way. And for that matter, I haven't heard you blathering on about Obadiah Westman. Has he asked to take you home from the singing? Mellie stiffened. She remembered her recent thought that she should give Obadiah's attention real consideration. No. He hasn't asked. Well, if he does, you should accept. He's nice. And not bad to look at, Beth said, giving her a nudge. Beth was right. Obadiah was nice and good-looking. His eyes were brown, unlike Caleb's blue ones. And his hair was a lighter shade of brown. It was longer than Caleb's, falling over his forehead and even covering his eyes at times. He had broad shoulders and was of medium height, Caleb being much taller. Mellie gave a start. Since when did she so blatantly compare the two? Couldn't she consider Obadiah on his own merits? I could tell Caleb to let Obadiah know you're interested, Beth said. No. The word came loud and fast from Mellie's lips. Her face went hot. I mean, if Obadiah wants to ask me, he'll ask me. No need to draw Caleb into it. She turned away from Beth and busied herself with straightening the plates in the cupboard, something that didn't need to be done. Mellie? Beth's tone was solemn. Mellie cringed. Had Beth guessed her attraction to Caleb? What? She responded, not looking at her. Why don't you go with Caleb and me to the singing? Now, Mellie swirled around to her sister. What? Go in the courting buggy with you? Are you crazy? Beth's brows drew down low over her eyes. No, I'm not crazy. I just thought it'd be nice if the three of us went together. Caleb would have a fit. Beth shook her head. He wouldn't. He likes you fine, and you're good company. Mellie studied her sister. Why? Why what? Why would you want me to go? Beth fidgeted with her hands and then gave Mellie a pronounced smile. I just thought it'd be fun. Do say yes, Mellie. Please. There was an odd tone in Beth's voice that Mellie couldn't pinpoint. But her sincerity was clear enough. Beth smiled again and touched Mellie's arm. Say you'll come? Against Mellie's better judgment, she heard herself agree. A few minutes later, she left the kitchen doubting her own sanity. Chapter 4. Girls, did you finish redding up the kitchen? Ruthie asked. Mellie and Beth both turned away from the window where they were awaiting Caleb's arrival. Yes, Mellie answered, wondering why Ruthie didn't just go into the kitchen and check for herself. Good, because you know how busy it's going to be tomorrow morning. Mellie's eyebrows raised in question. Why? What's happening tomorrow? It's Monday, Ruthie said. And what with all my children, we're going to have plenty of laundry to do. There was always plenty of laundry to do on a Monday. Although, Ruthie was right, adding her family to the mix would increase the load exponentially. But Ruthie would be there, lending an extra pair of hands to the job. For children, you know, Ruthie added. Mellie bit back her annoyance. From Ruthie's talk, one would think 4 children was a herd. In reality, 4 children was next to nothing in their district. In fact, 4 children would be considered a small family. Mellie wondered why Ruthie felt continually compelled to make an issue of it. Don't worry, Ruthie, Beth said. We'll get it done. Mellie doesn't open her shop on Mondays. Which was true, something that Mellie regretted right then. She'd have to fortify herself to spend the whole day with Ruthie come Monday. He's here, Beth said. She looked at Ruthie. We're leaving now. Ruthie stooped to peer out the window and shook her head. Why 2 girls are going in one courting buggy is beyond me. And in my day, the young man brought the girl home from singing, not took her there. Who's he really here to pick up? Neither Mellie nor Beth answered. They both simply waved their goodbye and ran out the door. But Ruthie wasn't wrong. Most times a young man would escort a girl home, albeit the long way. But Caleb wasn't most young men. For some reason, he wanted to take Beth to and from the singing. Which, by all views, seemed mighty odd. Dread climbed through Mellie's gut as they hurried down the steps. What was Caleb going to think when he saw her climb in? He had already gotten out of the buggy, no doubt to help Beth inside. When he spotted Mellie, he stopped dead. Mellie? She raised her chin and smiled. Good evening, Caleb. Beth invited me to come along. She hurried to add, but I won't need a ride home. Mellie knew that the way home was when the real courting happened. And she couldn't abide the thought of getting in Caleb's way with Beth. She would burn with shame. Yes, you do, Beth said, her voice strong. She looked at Caleb. She'll need a ride home, too. No, Mellie argued. I have other arrangements. She didn't, but she would before long. she'd ask one of her friends to take her home. It wouldn't be hard to find someone. You don't, Beth said sharply. Yes, I do, Mellie said, her glare daring Beth to continue. What was wrong with her sister anyway? Didn't she see how humiliating this was in front of Caleb? And then, Beth snapped her fingers. Oh. I am so silly sometimes. Of course, Mellie has a ride home. They all climbed into the buggy, and Beth turned to Caleb. Obadiah Westman is sweet on our Mellie. That's who will probably take her home. She arranged herself on the seat and looked straight ahead with a smug look. Mellie blew out her breath. This was going from bad to worse. She had no wish for Caleb to know about Obadiah's interest, something she was afraid to question herself too closely about. But in any case, she wasn't happy with Beth's pronouncement. She glanced over at Caleb. His jaw was set, and he gave her a quick look as if trying to assess her reaction to Beth's words. Mellie gave him a wobbly smile and then focused her attention straight ahead. The buggy ride couldn't get over fast enough for her. It took nearly a half hour to get to the Studers' barn. Since the Studers had hosted the church meeting that morning, they were the host of the youth singing that night. Most of the youth were already there, not having gone home from the morning church meeting and the noon meal. Caleb parked the buggy in the long row of buggies outside the barn. The two sisters jumped out before Caleb had a chance to help either of them. Mellie nodded her thanks to Caleb and dashed into the barn before Beth opened her mouth to say something further to embarrass her. Inside the barn, the lanterns hanging on the beams gave a gentle glow to the evening. Clusters of youth were talking and laughing. In more than one shadowy corner, a couple stood, speaking in low voices to each other, seemingly oblivious to anyone else in the barn. Mellie hadn't taken 2 steps inside before she spotted Obadiah. He was leaning against a tool shelf chatting with a couple other boys. When he saw her, he straightened and a smile came to his lips. Without thinking, Mellie headed toward him. She saw the look of happy surprise on his face as he extricated himself from his friends and walked toward her. "Hello, Mellie," he said, his voice rich with pleasure. "Good evening, Obadiah." Obadiah looked around the room. "Did you come with your sisters?" "Yes." "Well, with Beth, anyway. Faith didn't want to come tonight." He nodded, and then scuffed his heavy black shoe over the floorboards. "That's nice." "Yes," she said again. "I enjoy the singings, don't you?" "Yes." Mellie grimaced. She certainly wasn't going to enthrall him with her witty talk. "I was wondering," he began. "Hello, Obadiah," Beth said, swooping close. "How are you tonight?" "Hi, Beth. I'm fine. Mellie and I were just talking about you." Mellie's eyes went wide. What was wrong with her sister that night? She was acting completely out of character. Beth was often shy in public, not this outgoing brash girl who couldn't keep her mouth shut. "You were?" Obadiah asked, his cheeks reddening. "That we were." Beth grinned at the two of them. "Well, enjoy the singing." She turned and went back to where Caleb had stopped. His face looked stormy, and Mellie wondered if he, too, was annoyed with Beth that night. "What were you saying about me?" Obadiah asked. A lock of his hair partially covered one of his eyes. "Something good, I hope." Mellie inhaled and smiled. "Beth is overly chatty this evening," she said as if that explained everything. Obadiah paused, obviously waiting for her to continue. When she didn't, he cleared his throat. "Are you needing a ride home tonight?" he asked, and his cheeks grew a deeper shade of red. Mellie could feel his nervousness. She could feel him urging her to accept. Did she dare? Would it be fair to accept his offer when she knew it came with more than just a ride home? If she agreed, What she was really saying was that she was open to his courtship. She glanced at her sister and Caleb. The two of them stood close together, talking. Well, Beth was talking anyway, and Caleb seemed quite intent on what she was saying. A flash of pain shot through Mellie. She had to face reality. Caleb was in love with her sister. Plain and simple. She turned back to Obadiah. Yes. I do need a ride home, she said firmly, her heart pounding. Her breathing turned shaky, but she retained her erect posture and kept her eyes on Obadiah's face. He grinned. Good. That's right, fine. I've got my buggy. She laughed. I assumed you did. He rubbed his shoe over the rough barn floor again. Yes. Of course, I do. Sorry. She shook her head and gave him her best smile. No need to be sorry. Obadiah kept his eyes on her for much of the evening. Mellie tried to focus on the songs. She enjoyed the singings, not only for the fellowship of her friends, but for the singing itself. She particularly enjoyed the faster songs they sang toward the end. She put her mind on the words, forcing her attention away from, not Obadiah, but Caleb. Without conscious thought, her eyes continually found her sister's boyfriend. Mellie loved the way he looked. She loved his intent expression when he bellowed out the low notes of a song. She loved his smile when one of his friends told him something funny. She loved the easy way he stood, his strong arms down at his sides, and his chin raised, with just the stubble of his whiskers showing. About 2/3 of the way through the evening, Mellie saw Beth studying her. Before she could look away, Beth caught her eye and gave her a strange look. Mellie's heart froze. Had Beth noticed her watching Caleb? Had her face betrayed her true feelings? She swallowed hard and smiled at Beth. Beth only narrowed her eyes and didn't smile back. Attending the singing that night was a horrible mistake. Why in the world had she allowed Beth to talk her into the whole fiasco? When the last song was sung, Mellie nearly tripped over her own feet in her rush to get outside. She burst through the barn doors and gulped the cool evening air. Everyone else was still inside, but she couldn't bear the thought of returning. She'd wait out there until Obadiah came to find her. She meandered through the buggies wondering which one was Obadiah's. To an outsider, the buggies probably all looked the same, but to the Amish, there were subtle differences. She busied herself recognizing which buggy belonged to whom. Then it occurred to her that Obadiah wouldn't be able to find her if she was hidden away amongst the buggies. She headed back toward the barn door and nearly ran into Caleb. Oh. Caleb, I didn't see you. Caleb gazed down at her. I'm sorry. Didn't mean to scare you. I'm not scared. They looked at each other for a long moment, and Mellie somehow felt that her words held a double meaning for Caleb. He seemed upset and preoccupied. Are you all right? She finally asked. He gave a start and nodded, as if she'd caught him doing something wrong. I'm fine. Mellie, called Obadiah. He approached the two of them. Caleb backed away from Mellie. Oh. Obadiah. Nice to see you. Obadiah looked from him to Mellie and then back to Caleb. You, too, Caleb. I'm ready to go home, Mellie said, crossing her arms over her stomach. Obadiah hesitated, and his eyes followed Caleb as he went back inside. Then he looked again at Mellie. Is he all right? Who? Caleb? Of course. He's looking for my sister. Mellie turned and started toward the row of buggies. Which one is yours, Obadiah? Within minutes, Mellie was inside Obadiah's buggy with him. She clasped her hands on her lap and could feel the sweat form. Obadiah guided the horse toward her house and then turned to her. He'd hung a lantern on an outside corner of the buggy, and it threw shadows across his face. "We can take the long way home, if you'd like," he said. "It's right pretty around Edmund's Pond." She licked her lips and nodded. "All right." He smiled and slapped the reins with renewed vigor. "Thank you for taking me home tonight, Obadiah." "It's my pleasure," he said. He cleared his throat. Well, I'd like to get to know you better, Mellie. Have you joined church yet?" "Yes. I've joined." Even in the shadows, she could see him grinning widely at her news. She shivered, knowing what he was thinking. Her baptism into the church allowed her to marry. She had a sudden urge to throw up her hands and say, "Not so fast," but that would be ridiculous. "I've joined, too." "It's strange, isn't it, how fast time goes?" She crinkled her nose. That sounded like something an old person would say. Eager to get off the subject, she pointed ahead to Edmund's Pond. "You ever go fishing?" His brow furrowed. "Go fishing?" "No. Too busy with the farm." "Do you have any hobbies?" "I like to read." Mellie sighed. Maybe he'd be better off with Beth, then. That would leave Caleb free. She frowned. She simply had to get herself under control. "Do you read?" he asked her. "No. Not much. Beth does, though." They fell silent then, the only sound the echoing clip-clop of the horses' hooves in the night air. Mellie quit trying to force a conversation and relaxed a bit. The evening really was lovely. She glanced up at the clear sky and admired the pattern of stars flickering like the lightning bugs hovering inches above the grass. The moon shimmered on Edmund's Pond, casting jagged beams of light across the water. Truly, it was magical, and Mellie allowed herself to get caught up in the beauty. She breathed deeply, filling her lungs with the fresh summer air. "It's nice out here," Obadiah said quietly. "I'm glad you're with me." Mellie smiled, a real one this time. "Thank you," she said. "And you're right. It's awfully nice." Obadiah slowed the horse, and they circled the far edge of the pond at a slow pace. Mellie heard a cow bellow in the distance and frogs chirping in the trees. "Can I take you home again sometime?" Obadiah asked. She looked into his eyes, and even in the darkness, she could see how they glistened with sincerity. Obadiah was a good person. A fine young man? She nodded. Yes. Beth tiptoed into the bedroom at nearly 11 o'clock that night. Faith had gone to sleep hours before, but Mellie was still awake, lying stiffly in bed, waiting. She remained quiet as Beth changed into her nightgown and then went down the hall to the bathroom. When she came back into the room and climbed into bed, Mellie spoke. "How was your ride?" "Oh, Mellie. I didn't know you were awake." Beth rustled under her covers. "Did I wake you?" "I'm sorry." "You didn't wake me." "Oh." There was a pause, and then, "You were waiting for me?" "I wouldn't say that. I was just awake." "When did you get in?" "An hour or so ago." Beth hummed. "I see. So you and Obadiah had a good time." With some surprise, Mellie realized that she and Obadiah did have a good time together. "Yes." Beth gave her pillow a small punch and then was still. "Caleb is sweet." Mellie tensed. Her sister continued, "Don't you think?" Mellie bit her lip. Was Beth trying to get her to admit her feelings for Caleb? No. Of course not. Beth wouldn't be so sneaky. Of course, he's sweet. You wouldn't like him otherwise, would you? Beth didn't answer for a long minute. No. I wouldn't like him if he wasn't sweet. And Obadiah? Mellie asked. Do you think he's sweet, too? Beth grunted a yes. Their bedroom door suddenly flew open and there stood Ruthie, holding a lantern high above her face. "What's going on?" she hissed. "Is someone sick?" Mellie sat up in bed. "No." "Why?" Faith stirred. "Huh? What's going on?" Ruthie sucked in her breath. "You girls in here jabbering like it's high noon. Now, pipe down. I have children who need their sleep." Mellie's jaw dropped. Had she and Beth been that loud? "We're sorry, Ruthie," Beth mumbled. "We won't talk anymore." Ruthie was like a quick, violent tornado coming into their room. "I should say you won't." And with that, she swished their door closed and was gone. Mellie remained sitting up, staring at the door. "What's wrong with her?" Beth whispered so quietly Mellie almost didn't hear her. "We weren't that loud," Mellie whispered back. Faith drew her quilt over her head. "Night, you too," she muttered from under the covers. "Sorry for waking you up," Mellie murmured. "Ruthie was waiting for me to get home," Beth said. "I'm sure of it. Wanting a reason to scold us." Mellie dropped back on her pillow. Scold them, indeed. They weren't Ruthie's children. They were grown girls. "She's not our mother," Beth grumbled and flopped over in bed. Mellie stared at the ceiling. She wished her mother was still in the big house. She didn't like her out there with Grandpa. Faith had been right in the first place, they couldn't care for Ma'am nearly as well with her in another house. She fingered the edge of her quilt and wondered what her dad would have to say about it if he was still alive. Chapter 5. Ruthie was a bustling hen in the morning. She hurried everyone through breakfast and shooed her children out the door to do chores before they'd finished chewing their last bites. "I've already got the clothes soaking," she said, dropping a handful of utensils into the dishwater. "At least my family's." Mellie quickly washed and rinsed the utensils. "We don't need to pre-soak anything except our brother's trousers." She looked at Faith. "Can you run upstairs and get them?" Faith looked relieved for a reason to leave the kitchen. "Yes. And I'll run out to the Dottie house and get Ma'am's and Grandpa's dirty clothes." Ruthie snorted. "Should have gathered them last night." "We'll have time," Beth said. "Don't fret so." "Don't fret? We'll be at it all day as it is." Mellie glanced through the window. "No rain today. It's a good day for hanging everything outside." "Is there enough line for it all?" Ruthie asked. "I forgot to check." "We have plenty of line." Beth gave Mellie a look behind Ruthie's back. Mellie simply shrugged her shoulders. "Dishes are finished." "So, you're not opening your sweet shop today, right?" Ruthie asked. "No. I'll help with the laundry." Mellie often was closed on Mondays. It didn't seem fair to leave all the laundry to Faith and Beth. Her regular customers knew she wasn't open on Sundays and most Mondays, so it wasn't a problem. Besides, Mellie couldn't use Sundays to do any baking, so she never had much stock on Mondays anyway. "She'll have to do some baking this afternoon, though," Beth said. "But Faith and I can help all day." Ruthie stopped and put her hands on her hips. "I certainly hope this sweet shop isn't going to get in the way of our work around here. You know, I'm not keen on that business in the first place." Mellie pressed her lips in a hard line, forcing herself to let the woman's comments go. "Ruthie," Beth said, turning to face her squarely. "Mellie's work at the sweet shop brings in a tidy sum of money to this household. I'm thinking you'll want to remember that." Mellie held her breath. What was Beth thinking to confront Ruthie in such a way? In fact, what had gotten into Beth in general? She continued to act quite unlike herself. Ruthie drew herself up to her full height, and her eyes flashed. She opened her mouth to speak but then snapped it closed. Mellie still hadn't breathed. Beth took a step toward Ruthie and stopped. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice soft. "That was rude of me." Mellie's breath seeped out. Ruthie's shoulders relaxed, and she sniffed. "It's all right, Beth. I imagine it's going to take some time getting used to each other around here." It was a generous statement coming from Ruthie. Mellie looked at Beth. Beth nodded and attempted to give a smile, which in Mellie's opinion, looked more like a grimace. Ruthie turned on her heel and left the kitchen. "Beth, what were you thinking?" Beth sagged as if the wind had been knocked out of her. "I was thinking that she can't come in here like she's in charge of everything. I was thinking that I'm already tired of her, and she's only been here 30 seconds. 30 seconds? Mellie gazed at her sister and laughed. "A right long 30 seconds. Beth giggled with her. "I'm sorry, Mellie. I'll be better. I promise." 30 seconds. Mellie repeated again, still laughing. "What's so funny?" Dan said, entering the kitchen. Mellie pressed her lips together. "Nothing," Beth said, her cheeks growing red. "Why aren't you out in the fields?" Mellie asked. "I'm going." He gazed at the two of them. How come Ruthie seems so upset? An awkward silence followed his question. Finally, Mellie spoke. "I think she's just getting used to living somewhere else. It has to be quite an adjustment for her, don't you think? She's lived her whole life at her parents' place." Dan tilted his head to the side. "Never thought about it. I guess you're right." He squeezed Mellie's shoulder and then went through the washroom and on outside. Faith came into the house, her arms full of dirty clothes. "I've got it all," she said. She paused and stared at Mellie and Beth. "What's going on? You two look guilty." Mellie shook her head. "Nothing. Just adjusting to each other is all." It was mid-afternoon, and most of the clothes had been fed through the wringer. Faith was already hanging the first loads outside. Beth and Mellie were taking a 5-minute break on the front porch. "The clothes will dry fast in this heat," Mellie said. "Yes." Mellie looked at her sister. "You all right, Beth?" Beth was staring ahead and the look in her eyes was concerning to Mellie. "You look awfully worried." Beth blinked and brought her focus to Mellie. "No, I'm fine." "You don't look fine. I want to apologize again for being so thoughtless this morning." "You don't have to keep apologizing. And I want to thank you for sticking up for me." Beth frowned. "Things would be a lot easier around here if there weren't so many of us. Eli will be leaving us soon as he gets married. That'll be one less." Mellie watched her sister. Was she about to reveal that she'd be leaving soon, too? To marry Caleb? True. But still. Mellie leaned forward. She braced herself. If Beth told her she would be marrying Caleb, Mellie wanted to make sure she had a pleasant expression on her face. But Beth said nothing more. She gazed again out into the yard, as if studying the willow tree that draped over the grass. Mellie frowned. Something was going on with Beth, and Beth obviously didn't want anyone to know about it. Mellie wondered if Caleb knew what it was. She wondered if it would be wrong of her to ask him. "We better get back at it," Beth said, standing. "Ruthie will come hunting for us otherwise." Mellie stood with her, and together, they headed back inside and down to the basement. They heard the wringer washer churning before they were halfway down the steps. Beth paused and put her hand on Mellie's arm. "You're a good sister," she said, and there were tears in her eyes. Mellie's heart lurched. Such endearing words were not common, and she couldn't help but feel afraid when she heard them. Something was afoot, that was for sure and for certain. Mellie didn't have to wait long to find out what it was. When she awoke the next morning, Beth's bed was empty. That was alarming in itself. With Mellie's baking schedule, she was always the first one up and about. Mellie lay in bed for another minute, listening intently. Perhaps Beth was in the bathroom, getting dressed. Or maybe she wanted a head start on her chores for the day. She knew there was a massive pile of ironing to do after the loads of washing they'd done the day before. But the house was quiet. Mellie sprang out of bed and hurried to the bathroom. It was empty. She ran back and got dressed quietly so as not to disturb Faith. She'd checked for Beth in the barn and the chicken coop. Surely, her sister was out there. Mellie wondered at herself. Why was she assuming there was something wrong simply because Beth wasn't in bed? There could be a million innocent reasons. But instinctively, Mellie knew there weren't. Something was wrong. Not wanting to awaken Ruthie, Mellie tiptoed down the stairs, avoiding each place on the steps that would creak her descent. Downstairs, the house was still shrouded mostly in dark. No one was about. She ran through the washroom and outdoors. The dew moistened her bare feet, but she hardly noticed. She ran across to the barn and flung open the door. Even in the shadows, she could see no one was there. She was about to run around to the coop, when she stopped short. The pony cart was missing. She ran back to Missy's stall. The horse was gone, too. Mellie backed up, her mind awhirl. Where in the world would Beth have gone with the pony cart at that hour? It made no sense at all. Unless... Panic grabbed her throat. Had Beth and Caleb eloped? They were both baptized, so they could marry. But no. They would never do it in such a way. Never. Or would they? Was that why Beth had been acting so strangely the last few days? Had she known all this time what she was planning to do? But Caleb wouldn't have eloped. She knew this deep in her heart. Caleb loved the people and their ways too much. Eloping would be like a slap in the face. And Beth? No, she wouldn't do it that way, either. Would she? Mellie stood in the middle of the barn, not knowing what to do or whom to tell. Should she run and tell Ma'am? Thing was, none of them liked to burden Ma'am with their problems anymore. With her continual pain, she had too much to contend with as it was. Grandpa? She could tell him. He would know what to do. She raced out of the barn and was halfway to the Dotty house, when she stopped. Dan. She could tell Dan. He was the eldest son. He should be informed. Tears came to Mellie's eyes. Why hadn't Beth confided in her? When had they turned that invisible corner where they didn't share their secrets anymore? What would Beth want her to do right then? Mellie's shoulders drooped. If Beth left secretly, then she wouldn't want Mellie running about screaming the news. She would have had a good reason for leaving. Mellie inhaled sharply. Maybe she should give Beth some time. She'd probably come rolling back into the drive any minute with a perfectly good reason for her absence. Mellie walked back to the big house. She'd give her sister a couple more hours. In the meantime, she'd get her baking well underway. The sweet shop was to be open that day, and she hardly had a thing to sell. In the kitchen, Mellie set out her baking pans, ingredients, measuring utensils, and rolling pin. She put on her apron and pulled out her largest bowl. She began scooping cups of flour into the sifter. She'd begin with cinnamon rolls since they were her best-selling item. Then she'd get some rolls rising and move on to the cookies. She debated whether to offer pies that day. She glanced at the clock. She wouldn't have time before Ruthie invaded the kitchen and Mellie was pushed to the side. A sudden thought struck her. Had Beth left because of Ruthie? Mellie frowned. Even if she had, where on earth would she go? They did have kin in Ohio. But there was no way Beth would be taking the pony cart all the way to Ohio. Mellie continued measuring flour and then pushed her hands into the soft dough, kneading and pulling it as her mind kept churning. Every few minutes, she glanced out the kitchen window into the growing daylight, looking for any sign of Beth's return. When she had the rolls put together and rising, she rinsed out the bowl and started in on the cookies. She decided on snickerdoodles as they seemed to be the most popular. If she had time, she would make some chocolate chunk cookies as well. Her hands flew about her work without much conscious effort. She felt most at home in the kitchen, and she loved the quiet mornings. Glancing for the umpteenth time at the clock, she knew her time alone was about to end. She wondered if just once, Ruthie would arise late, and give her a bit more peace. Her brow crinkled, and she shook her head. She needed to put a stop to that kind of thinking. It wasn't merciful or loving. She pulled out the cookie sheets and prepared a bowl of sugar and cinnamon. Rolling small balls of dough between her palms, she plopped them into the sugar mixture and tossed them around. Once they were covered in sweetness, she lined them onto the trays. "Morning, Mellie." Mellie looked up to see Faith. "Hi, Faith. I'm heading out to the barn to milk Hilda." "Where's Beth?" Mellie's hands went still. She inhaled deeply and shook her head. "I don't know. The pony cart is gone." She spoke in a low voice. Faith frowned. "Gone? Where? The feed and supply isn't even open this early." "I know." Mellie wiped her hands on the dish rag. "I don't know where she went." Faith strode to the window and gazed out. "It's only just light out there. Where could she have gone?" "I don't know. But this makes no sense." Mellie grasped Faith's arm. "You don't think she did something stupid, do you? You don't think that she and Caleb—" Faith's eyes went huge. "Ran off? You think they ran off?" Her voice rose in pitch with each word. "Shoo!" Mellie warned. She leaned close. "I don't know what to think. When did she leave?" "I didn't hear her go." "Did you?" "No. She sneaked out sometime before I woke up. I don't know when." Faith exhaled. "What are Ruthie and Dan going to say?" "I don't know. I was waiting before saying anything, hoping she'd come back." Faith pushed the edge of the curtain open a bit wider. She still could. Caleb might know. You can hardly go rushing over there to ask now, can you? Mellie sighed. "No. What should we do?" Mellie bit the corner of her lip. What could they do? At such times, she wished they had cell phones. She could simply call Beth and ask her where she was. But that was impossible. Mellie had broached the subject of a cell phone with her parents when she'd opened the sweet shop. Dad was not in favor, so she'd dropped the subject. Although, she hadn't completely forgotten it. With a cell phone, she could expand her business and supply other places with her baked goods. She wondered at herself. Why in the world was she thinking of such things when her sister was missing? "I'm going to the Glicks." Mellie made a sudden decision. She couldn't stand around and wonder for another minute. "Will you bake the cookies for me?" "I won't be long." "What are you planning to do? Pound on their front door and demand to speak to Caleb?" Mellie paused. "I don't know. I don't know what I plan to do. I'll figure it out." "But Mellie..." Mellie didn't wait to hear any more protests. She hurried out the side door and headed to the barn. She pulled the family's old bike from behind a stack of boards and mounted it. She hadn't ridden the bike for ages, but she wanted to make the trip to the Glicks as quickly as possible. If she was lucky, she'd be back before Ruthie got up. She curled her bare feet around the pedals and took off. The morning air was surprisingly brisk for summertime. She felt the dew in the air as it brushed over her face. The sparrows twittered in the trees as she passed, and their cheerful songs belied the worry in her heart. She was afraid, and she knew why. She was afraid she'd find Caleb missing, too. And oh, how she wanted him to still be there. To not be already married to her sister. Tears pricked the back of her eyes, and she blinked them away. It didn't take any time at all to reach the Glicks farm. She slowed and stopped out on the road. She dismounted and gazed at the house. Now what was she to do? She could hardly approach the family and ask outright if Caleb and Beth had run off together. As she stood observing the house, she realized the stupidity of her actions. She should have listened to Faith. What had she hoped for? That Caleb would be standing out on the road waiting for her? She blew out her breath and decided to head back home. Standing there was not going to solve anything. She climbed back on the bike, and taking one last glance at the farm, a flash of blue caught her eye. She paused and craned her neck to the side of the barn. She nearly burst into tears when she saw Caleb walk around the building carrying a bucket. He was there. He hadn't run off. She got off the bike and tossed it to the ground. Without thinking, she flew over the wet grass toward the barn. Caleb glanced up. When their eyes met, his mouth opened in surprise. He dropped the bucket and hurried to her. "Mellie, what are you doing here? What's wrong? Is Beth all right? Caleb?" She wanted to throw herself in his arms. She stopped short, completely flustered. He took her hand and pulled her back by the side of the barn. "What is it?" he repeated, and she saw the fear in his eyes. "I'm looking for Beth," she said. "Here? At this hour? What do you mean?" "She's gone." "I thought that maybe you and she—" Mellie couldn't finish her sentence, but she didn't need to. It was obvious that Caleb got her meaning. "No. No, Mellie." His brow furrowed, and he quickly released her hand as if he'd just realized he was still holding it. "Tell me what happened." He swallowed and looked at her intently. "She was gone when I got up. The pony cart is missing." Caleb took a step back and exhaled. He ran his hand over his chin. He shook his head. Something about his expression told Mellie he knew something. "Where is she, Caleb?" Her voice was pointed. "I don't know for sure." "You know something? I can see it on your face." "I don't know anything for sure." "Caleb?" Mellie wanted to grab his shoulders and shake him. "It's just something she said the other night on the way home from the singing." "What?" she asked. "What did she say?" Caleb looked down and scraped his boot over the dirt. "She talked about teaching. She said something to me about teaching, too, the other day." But still, Mellie looked at him. "They need a schoolteacher over in the Meadow Lark district. That's a 2-hour drive from here by van." "I know. But she took the pony cart. Do you think she's going there?" Caleb gave her a blank look. "I don't know." Mellie slumped. "I don't understand. It would take all day in the cart. And it'd be dangerous, wouldn't it? Taking the pony cart all that way." Caleb took off his hat and gripped the straw rim. "I don't know, Mellie. So what should we do? What can we do?" "Wait. That's all we can do," Mellie said the words slowly, hearing the finality in them. "You'll let me know?" Mellie nodded. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Caleb," she whispered. Her throat tightened. How could Beth do something like this? Was she so desperate that she couldn't share her plan with anyone? Caleb put his hat back on, shoving it low over his forehead. I'll talk to you later. His eyes were pained. All right, Mellie murmured. She turned and ran to the road, not looking back, not checking to see if he was watching her. She didn't need to. She felt his eyes on her every move. But she knew he wasn't thinking of her. He was thinking of her sister. Chapter 6. Mellie leaned the bike against the barn wall and squared her shoulders. She needed to walk back into the kitchen as if nothing was amiss. Maybe no one was up yet but Faith, and they could have a moment together before the storm hit. But it wasn't to be. Mellie walked into the kitchen to face the open glares of both Dan and Ruthie. "What's this?" Dan asked. "Beth's gone." Mellie's gaze flew to Faith, who made a helpless gesture and gave her a slight shake of her head. Mellie sighed. "Evidently." "And you were off looking for her?" Dan asked. Mellie's gaze again darted to Faith, and she gave Faith a silent thank you with her eyes. So her sister hadn't divulged her impulsive race over to the Glicks. "I was on the bike," she said. "Any sign of her?" Dan asked. "No." "Where did the girl go?" asked Ruthie, her voice shrill. "We've got chores to do today." "I can't believe—" "Ruthie!" Dan interrupted gruffly, giving her a stern look. "Will you stop with the chores? I'm worried about my sister." Ruthie's lips clamped together in a scowl. "You have no idea where she is?" "She told you nothing?" Dan asked. "She told me nothing," Mellie said. She wondered if she should mention the school teaching comment or not. "I'm sorry," Ruthie muttered. She straightened her back. "Of course, I'm concerned about Beth. It's just that I'm aware of all to be done around here." Mellie glanced at her and had to give her grudging respect for at least an attempt at an apology. Dan began pacing. "Does Ma'am know anything?" "We didn't ask her," Faith said. "You want me to go out there and ask?" "No," Dan answered. "Not yet." "I think we should just wait," Mellie said. "She's an adult, right? She must have her reasons." "Scaring her family half to death doesn't sound like an adult to me," Ruthie snapped, and then her features relaxed. "Sorry." "I think Mellie's right," Faith said. "Let's just wait a bit and not panic." Eli ambled into the kitchen. "What's going on?" "Beth has taken the pony cart, and we don't know where she went," Faith said. Eli's eyebrows raised, and then he shrugged. "Is breakfast about ready?" There was a long moment of stunned silence. Then, they all burst into laughter. Leave it to Eli to only be thinking about his stomach. But his comment served its purpose, and they all relaxed a bit, returning to the tasks at hand. Mellie shook her head. "Breakfast is not quite ready, Eli. Give us a few minutes." Ruthie, Mellie, and Faith got busy with breakfast preparations, and the boys went out to the barn. The rest of the morning played out like every morning had played out for days. Things were back to normal until more was found out. 2 hours later, Mellie was in her sweet shop organizing her freshly baked goods. She heard a car pull up outside and gave a satisfied smile. Her first English customer of the day, and she'd barely opened. "Morning, Mellie," Mrs. Owens said, entering the shop. "Morning, Mrs. Owens." Mellie nodded at one of her favorite regulars. The Owens could be counted on to stop by at least twice a week. Her snickerdoodles were their favorite. "Mr. Owens with you today?" Mrs. Owens shook her head, her gray curls bobbing against her neck. "Nope. I gave him a list this morning." She laughed heartily. "It's a long one, too." That man needs to start pulling his weight around the house. Mellie laughed with her. Mrs. Owens was famous for the lists of chores she made for her husband, always going on and on about them to Mellie. Since Mr. Owens had retired, Mrs. Owens shared that it was her sacred duty to keep her husband busy so he wouldn't drop dead of boredom like other retired men. He's finally going to make them planters for my back windows. She leaned closer to Mellie. I've been wanting em for 5 years, honey. 5 years, not months, not weeks, not days. Again, she laughed. Where are your snickerdoodles, Mellie? I don't see them out here. Mellie reached under the counter and pulled out a neatly wrapped package of 24 cookies. I didn't have time to make very many, so I held these back for you. Aw, Mellie. You're the sweetest thing. Mrs. Owens plopped her purse on the counter and proceeded to dig through it. She pulled out her wallet and extracted some cash. Here you go, dearie. Mellie took the money and tucked it into the cash box. Anything new on the horizon? Mrs. Owens asked her. No. Nothing new, Mellie answered, then realized that her sister missing would definitely qualify as something new. I guess I better get back to the OL homestead, Mrs. Owens said with a twinkle. Got to check up on Ralph, you know. Someone has to. She gave Mellie a wave and left the shop to the tinkle of the bell over the door. Mellie had been certain Mrs. Owens was going to come that morning. She was glad she'd put the snickerdoodles aside. She knew Mrs. Owens liked special consideration. But then, Mellie mused, didn't most people? She heard another car and was mildly surprised to see Elizabeth Grover enter the store. She was the wife of the Mennonite van driver Mellie's family used for longer trips. She'd never known the woman to come to her shop. Good morning, Elizabeth. Elizabeth pulled her sweater about her shoulders a little more snugly, though the morning was warm. Not here to buy any sweets, she said. I have a message for you. Mellie's brow creased. Yes. From your sister, Beth. Mellie's heart flip-flopped, and she stepped from behind the counter. What is it? She drove over in the cart this morning. Now why that girl didn't have Isaac pick her up at your house is beyond me. Then she told me that she forget to leave a note. Elizabeth frowned. Which again, doesn't make no sense. She'd arranged the trip with Isaac beforehand, so wouldn't all of you already know? Mellie's throat went dry. Anyway, she asked that I stop by and tell you that she'll be back this evening and not to worry. Elizabeth peered at Mellie with narrowed eyes. You weren't worried, were you? The girl asked Isaac to drive her over to Meadowlark. He's staying there until she needs a ride back home. Meadowlark. So Beth was pursuing the teaching position. Was Beth planning to move away? And what about Caleb? Well, Elizabeth said. Don't you agree? Mellie gave a start. What? I'm sorry. I didn't hear you. I said it seems like mighty odd behavior to me. Mellie walked back around the counter, giving herself a second to digest the news. Thank you so much for taking the time to deliver Beth's message. Mellie's smile was pleasant. I'd like to give you some rolls as a thank you. The smile remained glued to Mellie's face. What? Oh no, that's not necessary. Elizabeth waved her hand, and her sweater slipped off her shoulder. She fussed with it and brought it back snugly to her neck. Glad to be of help. You tell your mother hello for me, would you? Yes. Thanks again. Elizabeth slipped out, and Mellie stood completely still. Beth wants to be the teacher in Meadowlark. Mellie put her hands on the counter and took a long, slow breath. Why hadn't she just told them? Was she afraid Dan might say no? Was that it? Mellie put her cash box under the counter and hurried out of the shop. She took a moment to secure the door and then she flew over the yard to the big house. She burst through the front door and found Faith in the kitchen. "Beth's in Meadowlark," she blurted. "What?" Faith turned to her. "Meadowlark? I think she wants to be the teacher there." "What?" Faith stared at her. "The main thing is that she's fine," Mellie said. "I need to tell Dan and the boys." "Will you tell Ruthie?" Faith grimaced but nodded. "I still don't understand," she said. But Mellie was already out the door. She planned to tell Dan and then figure out a way to tell Caleb. She didn't dare go to his house again. She'd been lucky once that day. It wouldn't be seemly at all if she was seen hanging about hoping to speak with him. And she would be seen easily now, considering it was pure daylight. Dan was in the barn, and she gave him Beth's message. "She wants to move to Meadowlark?" he asked, his brows raised. "I don't know for sure," Mellie answered. "She'll be back today." "I thought she was sweet on Caleb Glick." "How's that going to work?" Mellie shook her head. "I don't know. She'll tell us when she gets back." Mellie left him standing there with his mouth pressed into a tight line. She scurried back to her shop, her mind whirling to come up with a plan to tell Caleb. She entered her shop and no sooner had she settled behind the counter than Caleb himself showed up. "I'm sorry to be a bother." He approached her. "But I'm worried. Have you found out anything?" Mellie stood, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. She dreaded telling him the news. "Mellie?" She took a deep breath. "Yes. Our van driver's wife came in. You know, Elizabeth Grover. Beth went to Meadowlark, like you suspected." Caleb didn't move. His face went pale, and his eyes glazed over. "Caleb?" Mellie went to stand before him. He shuddered and focused on her. He gave her a tremulous smile. "Good. That's good. She's safe then?" "Yes, she's safe. She's coming back later today." He nodded. "Good. That's good," he repeated. Mellie felt sick to her stomach for him. The ramifications of Beth's trip weren't lost on either of them. "I'm sorry," Mellie whispered. How she wanted to take his hand and hold it. How she wanted to lean against his shoulder and share his sorrow. "So, then?" He took a huge breath. "She'll likely be moving away." Mellie bit her lip and nodded. "She'll be chosen as teacher," he said. "She's smart and eager. She'll make a right fine teacher." "That she will," Mellie agreed. He stumbled back toward the door. "Tell her I stopped by, would you, Mellie?" She rushed past him to open the door for him. The bell sounded hollow as it echoed through the shop. "I will." Caleb took a step through the doorway and paused, looking back at her. "Thank you." He gave her a long gaze and then turned and left. Mellie shut the door. She peered through the window and watched him leave. He walked slowly, heavily, as if carrying bales of hay on his back. How could Beth even entertain the notion of leaving him? He was so wonderful. So kind and gentle. Funny when he wanted to be. How could Beth leave him? How could she break his heart? Beth drove the pony cart into the drive at 7 o'clock that evening. Mellie was on the porch waiting for her. When she appeared, Mellie jumped up and flew across the yard to greet her. "Beth." Beth gave her a look of pure joy. "It's done, Mellie. I'm to be their new teacher." "Meadowlark?" Beth tucked the reins to her side. "Yes. Meadowlark. It's lovely there." As far as Mellie was concerned, Meadowlark didn't look any different than Hollybrook. "I see. I'll be boarding with the Millers. They're a right nice family." 7 children. 4 of them are still in school. Won't that be fun? Boarding with my very own students. There was a dreamy look in her eyes, and Mellie became so frustrated that she had to squelch a sudden urge to shake her. Beth's animation faded, and she looked solemnly at Mellie. I'm sorry. I should have told you right away what I was doing. It would have saved us all worry. It's just that. Well, I thought that Dan might, she sighed and put her hand on Mellie's arm. Is everyone angry with me? We were worried, Beth. You shouldn't have gone away like that. But I asked the driver's wife. Yes, and thank you for that. But before then, we didn't know anything. I even went to Caleb's. At the mention of Caleb, all the color drained from Beth's face. Her lower lip quivered. Does he know? Where I went, I mean. He knows. What did he say? Indignation surged through Mellie. You should talk to him yourself. You like him? Beth leveled a steady gaze at her. Mellie stepped back. What? He's your beau. I know that. But, you're sweet on him. I'd have to be blind and stupid not to notice it. Mellie's face flushed hot. But Beth. Beth raised her hand. You don't have to say anything. You don't even have to apologize. It's the truth, plain and simple. But Beth. Beth picked up the reins again. I want to teach. There's no way I can teach and marry Caleb. I'd be in the family way within months, I just know it. Then I couldn't be a teacher anymore. Beth was right. She couldn't teach anymore if she was expecting. Besides, you like him more than I do, Beth said. And he likes you. He just doesn't realize it yet. Mellie gasped softly. How could Beth possibly know such a thing? And Beth hadn't seen the look on Caleb's face when he learned she was gone. Beth laid her hand against her throat and glanced around the property. I'll miss it here. But Dan doesn't have to worry. Whatever wages I have left after my room and board, I'll send back. Dan won't expect that. Ruthie will. And I won't be responsible for her ire. Beth slapped the reins on the pony's back and continued to the barn. Mellie jogged beside her. When Beth stopped at the gaping doors, Mellie stepped close. I think it's fine, she said. What you're doing? Beth looked at her with tears in her eyes. Do you, Beth? Do you? It's what you want to do. And you'll be a good teacher. Beth nodded. I will. To anyone else, Beth's comment might have smacked of vanity, but Mellie knew what her sister meant. Beth would be a good teacher because she'd put every bit of her love and energy into it. About Caleb, Beth said. Mellie stiffened. He won't mope for long. And don't ask me how I know. I just do. She gave her sister a look heavy with meaning. And you'll be there when he gets over me. Mellie exhaled slowly. Beth took Mellie's arm. You're much better suited for him than I am anyway. He'll come to understand that. Mellie felt a stirring in her chest. How she hoped, no, how she prayed her sister might be right. I'll talk to him, Beth said. Oh. Not about me. Mellie cried, alarmed. No, not about you. About me. I'll call it off. He already knows. Beth lowered her gaze for a moment, then looked back up at Mellie. I'm sure he does. Still, it's the right thing for me to talk to him. He's a fine person, Mellie. I know that. Mellie pressed her hands to her chest, and her heart beat erratically at everything that was happening. Beth was leaving. And Caleb would be free. She sucked in her breath and chided herself. Caleb being free didn't guarantee one single thing. Chapter 7. Within 3 weeks, Beth was gone. Mellie sat on her bed and stared at the emptiness around her. Beth didn't have a lot of belongings, but with them cleared out, the room looked positively cavernous. Mellie was grateful that Faith had moved in when Dan and Ruthie had arrived. Strange, the room had always held just the 2 sisters until recently, but now, going back to 2 after the 3 of them had been together, made the room look huge. Mellie's eyes welled with tears. Truth was, she missed Beth. She got along with Faith just fine, but Beth had always been her closest sister. And now, without Beth, Mellie felt as if part of her very soul was missing. She shook her head and scolded herself. Such stuff and nonsense. She rose and repinned her cap securely over her bun. Enough moping around. She needed to get to her sweet shop and open for business. Otherwise, her customers wouldn't be able to count on her and would stop coming. She picked up the small hand mirror on the dresser and looked at herself. Her face was pale, and her features were drawn. This wouldn't do. Beth was gone, and the sooner she got used to it, the better. She licked her lips and put on a brave smile. Then she set the mirror down and hurried from the room. Walking downstairs and through the house, she heard Ruthie instructing Faith on the proper way to cut in lard when making biscuits. Mellie cringed. Faith knew good and well how to make fluffy biscuits. She didn't need a bossy sister-in-law to teach her. Truth be known, Faith had often baked biscuits to be sold in the sweet shop. Mellie hurried from the house and hustled down the drive to her shop. She opened the door and went inside, rearranging the baked goods she'd brought down earlier that morning. She ignored the sadness hovering over her and focused completely on the tasks at hand. She prayed for a lot of customers that day. With a lot of business, there wouldn't be any time to ponder how many things in her life had changed over the last month or so. The bell tinkled, and she looked up. When she saw who it was, her throat constricted. Caleb walked to the counter. "Ma'am sent me for some of your apple bread," he said. Mellie stood still. She knew full well that Bertha Glick made fine apple bread herself. It made no sense that she would be sending Caleb to purchase any. "It's over here," Mellie said, pointing. Caleb took a long stride and stood in front of the apple bread. He stared at it as if he expected the loaves to move or perform or speak to him. Mellie frowned. Finally, he said, "It's not true. Ma'am didn't send me at all." He looked at her, and she saw the hesitation in his eyes. "I really came by to see how you're doing." Mellie blew out her breath. "I'm doing fine. Missing Beth." She surprised herself by mentioning Beth's name. But in a flash, she realized why. She was testing the waters. Checking to see Caleb's reaction. "I know you do." He crossed his arms over his chest. "I know." Mellie moved closer. "I'm sorry, Caleb." He inhaled deeply and gazed at her. "No need to feel sorry. Beth is happy. That's what matters." His enthusiasm did not quite reach his eyes. Mellie watched him, wishing with all her heart that Caleb was free of his tie with Beth. And then he did something that shocked her down to her core. He touched her elbow. That was all. One small touch. It was so unexpected that she nearly stumbled backward against the shelf. But she didn't. She stayed entirely, completely still and gazed up at him. He kept his fingers on her for at least 5 seconds, and she felt his warmth flow through her. She swallowed past the lump in her throat and looked into his eyes. Those beautiful blue eyes flecked with gold. He dropped his hand from her arm, but he held her gaze. And that was when she saw it. She wasn't so foolish as to think he was declaring anything to her, but she saw his willingness. He had reached out to her. He had made a connection. His gaze flickered, and he stepped back. He nodded, such a small movement, it was barely perceptible. But Mellie saw it, and she clung to it. He broke their eye contact then and moved to the door. He opened it, paused, and took a large sweeping breath. He stepped outside, and the door clinked shut behind him. As she always did, Mellie stepped quickly to the window and watched him depart. She might have been mistaken, but she thought she detected a new lightness in his step. Not much, mind you. Only the barest hint. He stopped walking and looked back to the shop. Mellie was going to duck behind the curtains so he wouldn't see her watching him, but she wasn't fast enough. Their eyes met once again and their gazes held. Mellie could hardly breathe. He raised his hand in a wave, and she raised her hand, too. Even through the window glass, she could feel the charge in the air between them. He tipped his head. And then with a small half-smile, he continued down the road. For the longest moment, Mellie didn't even notice that her hand remained raised. When she finally did notice, she lowered it slowly to her side. Her spirit was near to bursting. Oh, how she loved Caleb Glick. Her heart nearly burned with love for him. She closed her eyes and thanked God, for she knew with everything in her that her hope was not displaced. Caleb was healing, and in time, he would turn to her. And she would be there, waiting. The end. Thank you for listening to Mellie's Sweet Shop by Brenda Maxfield. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Brenda Maxfield, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Brenda Maxfield Amish Romance.